Okay, so this is another Mathfolio video. This is actually a follow-up to the equations and inequalities review number 1 that I did. If you need the review sheet, you can download it at mathfolio.com/alg1/EQIN2. For the first video and first worksheet, you would just go to EQIN. Okay, so let's get started. Question number 1 is asking us to solve this equation. So in this case, solving the equation means to get d all by itself. So what we would have to do is divide by the coefficient. So we would divide by the -5. One thing that I always do is ask myself what is happening to the d, and in this case it's being multiplied by -5. So I do the inverse operation. I divide by -5. Got to do the same to the other side. And so in this case the 5's will cancel and become 1, so we won't write it. The negative divided by a negative is a positive, and so d comes out the end. And I know that positive divided by a negative is going to give me a negative answer. So now I've got to think how many 5's go into 105. Well, there's 20 5's in 100, and so one extra 5 means that there's 21 5's in 105. My answer is d equals -21. Okay, 1b is asking us a similar question. We've got to solve this equation. We need to find out what y is. So when we think about what's happening to y, well, it's being subtracted from 7. So if I undo the last thing that I said, I'm going to take away this 7. And this is where quite a few students go wrong, is they'll cancel the 7. They'll know that 12 minus 7 gives you 5, but then they'll just bring down y. And the problem is, y equals 5 is not the answer. We have to also bring down this minus y, which in turn basically means negative y after the 7's been removed. And so when we think of negative y equals 5, we could really think of this as being -1y. And so our step to get y on its own would be to divide by the coefficient, because right now it's being multiplied by -1. So if we divide both sides by -1, we end up getting y equals -5, and that is our answer for number 1b. Okay, so now 1c, things are getting a little tougher here because we've got g, which is the variable that we're looking to get, and it's being divided by 9 and then added to -5. So really what we want to do is undo that last step. Now the last step is when you add -5. If we start timesing by 9 here, it gets a little messy because we've got to make sure that we multiply the entire left side by 9 and the entire right side by 9. So I think the strategy of thinking what's the last thing that's happening to the variable probably saves you a lot of trouble. So in this case, g is being divided by 9 and then added to -5. So we need to do the opposite. So we can zap this -5 by adding 5. We've got to do the same to both sides. And this little dotted line, dashed line really does help make sure that we do the same to both. Now -3 plus 5 is 2. The 5's do cancel. -5 plus 5 is 0, so we don't put anything. And we bring down our g over 9. So now the next step, again, all the time we think what is happening to the variable. Well, here g is being divided by 9. So we've got to do the opposite, times by 9, do the same to both sides. And if we divide by 9, times by 9, they cancel. And we're left with g equals 18. And that is our answer, g equals 18, for number 1c. Okay, 1d. In this case, we've got p's on both sides, so we do have to be very careful here. So I'm going to draw my dashed line. Now 5p plus 40 equals 10 minus p. So my advice, I think it's really good advice, it stops you from making many mistakes, is to think, where's the baby p? Where's the baby variable? Well, here this is 5p's, 5 times p. And over here, we can consider it -1p. Right here, so the baby is -1p. So how do we zap this baby right now? Well, we do the opposite. If it says -1p, we're going to add p, add 1p. And so we've got to do the same to the other side, add p, which just keep in mind is always 1p. If there's no number in front of the variable, it's a 1. So by adding p to both sides, it cancels over here, it becomes 0, so we don't write it. We bring the 10 down, and then on the left of the equals for this equation, we've now got 5p plus 1p is 6p, plus 40 equals 10. So now we've got basically a two-step equation. So we think what's happening to the p? Well, it's being multiplied by 6 and then added to 40. So if we undo the last thing we said, which is add 40, so we're going to subtract 40, and we do the same to the other side, then the 40s cancel here, we bring down the 6p, and 10 minus 40 is going to be negative 30. So now the next step, because remember this was a two-step equation, is to think, well, what's happening to the p? It's being multiplied by 6, so we're going to do the opposite. We're going to divide by 6. Got to do the same to both sides. So final piece of this is bring down the p. Negative divided by a positive is going to be negative, and 30 divided by 6 is 5. So our answer is p equals negative 5. Okay, so that was the answers A through D for number 1. So now we're on to number 2. So let's go through these. We've got 2A and 2B on the screen, and one thing to notice is that it tells us in bold, but it really doesn't need to tell us this in bold. We've really got to constantly look back at the question, make sure we're answering what we've been told to answer. So this is an inequality, very different from equations because we don't see an equal sign. Solving it is kind of similar to solving equations, and then graphing is where we shade in a number line. So in this case, we've got 5 minus 2x is greater than negative 5. So the x is being multiplied by 2, and then that result is being subtracted from 5. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. Now, there's a lot of places we can go wrong here, so we've got to be super careful. The 5's cancel here. We're going to bring down negative 2x. We're going to bring down the inequality, which is greater than. Now, negative 5 minus 5 is negative 10. It is not 0. You're already negative at negative 5 and you're subtracting more, so you get to negative 10. Now this next step should really cause alarm bells going off, because we see that the x is being multiplied by negative 2. So what we have to do is divide by negative 2, but what we've got to remember is with inequalities, when you're dividing or multiplying by a negative, which is what we're doing here, so really this has to be alarm bells. When we're dividing or multiplying by a negative number, what we have to do is we have to flip this inequality. So straight away I'm going to change this greater than to a less than. Now the negative 2's cancel. We'll bring down the x. Negative 10 divided by negative 2 is 5, and that's a positive 5. So right here, this is our solution, but we do have to graph it. It's going to change to green. By graphing it, we draw a number line. We're going to, because it's a number line, it goes on forever in each direction. I'm going to put 0 in the middle. I'm also going to label 5. Now I'm going to think, what could x be? X can be any number that's less than 5. So I'm going to change to orange right now. It could be any number that is less than. So I'm kind of going to shade this a little. You'd be expected to be very neat with this. Any number less than 5. So I've shown it with an arrow also. But we have to indicate whether the number could be 5. And in this case it can't, because x must be less than. So if x was 5, 5 is less than 5, doesn't really make sense. So what we've got to do is put an empty circle. And that's the graph of x is less than 5. If it could have been equal to 5, we would have filled in this circle. Okay, 2b. Over here, we've got n's on both sides. So the first thing that I'm going to do is look for the baby variable. So here we've got 2n's, there we've got 4n's. So I'm going to get rid of the baby. I'm going to subtract 2n from both sides. So these cancel. I'm left with 8 less than, now 4n minus 2n is 2n minus 12. So now this is like a two-step inequality. So I've got to think what's happening to the n. So it's being multiplied by 2, and then 12 is being subtracted from it. And so I'm going to do the inverse of the last thing that I said, which was subtract 12. So I'm going to add 12 to both sides. You could put your dotted line if you wanted to and it helped you. 8 plus 12 gives me 20. The 12s over here cancel. Minus 12 plus 12 is 0. I'm going to bring down my inequality and put 2n. Notice I didn't flip any inequality here because I did not divide or multiply by a negative number. So now what's happening to the n? It's being multiplied by 2. So I'm going to do the opposite. So I'm going to divide by 2. Again, no alarm bells here because we're just dividing by a positive. 2n divided by 2 gives me n. I'm going to put the same inequality there and then 10. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that if 10 is less than n, that means that n must be more than 10. All I did was read this thing backwards. I didn't flip any inequality, I just read it backwards. So this is my solution to this inequality up there, but now I need to graph it. So similar to before, I just draw my number line, put a couple of arrows on it, label 0, label the number in question, which is 10. Now I'm told that n must be greater than 10, can't be equal, so it's an empty circle. I'm going to shade the numbers bigger and make sure there's an arrow on there. That's my answer to number 2, B. Okay, number 3. So word problems really aren't a lot of people's favorite types of questions, but let's go through it. So I'm thinking of a number. Straight away, I'm just going to call that x. I'm told when I subtract 10 from it. So subtracting 10 from it would mean you take your number and you subtract 10 from it. And you know what? I'm going to just wrap it in parentheses. So that's taking my number and subtracting 10 from it. Then says, and multiply the result by 2. So I would do this times by 2. So far I'm up to here, and I did everything. I get a value equal to the sum, so what I get is something equal to the sum, so I'm thinking about addition, the sum of -5 and the original number. Well, -5, we can write like this. The original number we know is x. So now I'm going to take everything that I've got up here and just write it a little better underneath where I need to write it. So instead of x minus 10 times 2, I'm going to write it showing the distributive property really. I'm putting the 2 right on the door of the parentheses. So I've got 2x minus 10, and this equals, well, -5 plus x is the same as just switching them around and saying x plus -5. Well, if we're adding a negative, we're really just subtracting. So this would be a very clear and precise answer to 3a. The next step, say solve the equation from a to find the original number. So let me write it out again. I've got 2 parentheses, x minus 10 equals x minus 5. So I'm going to change color for a second. Let's go to red. So when we're distributing, we can send rockets. So 2 times x is 2x. 2 times minus 10 is going to be minus 20. You can think of that as -20 as well. And this equals x minus 5. So again, I've got the variable on both sides. I need to get them all together. And remember, if there's no number, it's really an invisible 1. So to get them all together, I'm going to focus on the baby. This is a 2x, that's a 1x. So I'm going to subtract the baby. I'm going to get rid of this baby. So I've got to do the same to both sides. Subtracting x from both sides. 2x minus x gives me x. Minus 20 comes down. Let's just bring it straight down. These cancel. They've gone. This equals -5. So now the next step that I'm going to do, I'm going to just quickly change the color to blue, is I'm thinking of my variable. It's a one-step equation now. What's happening to the x? It's being it's having 20 subtracted from it, and then we get our answer. So in order to undo this, we need to add 20. If we do it to one side, we've got to do it to the other. And if we're careful now, we won't make a mistake. The 20s cancel. We're left with x equals now -5 plus 20 takes us to 15. If you're a little confused with this, we've got to think of, well, you know what? -5 is to the left of 0, and if we add 20, we're already going to add 5 to get to 0, and then we've got 15 left, so that would take us to 15. So that was number 3, B. Our answer was x equals 15. Okay, so number 4. This has a few parts to it, and we've got to be very careful. Lots of words, few numbers, and something's in bold. We've got some italic as well. So let's go through this. Now, Tommy is a tractor salesman. He earns $2,000 per month. So I'm going to underline it straight away, or in fact circle it. $2,000 per month. He also gets $80 per tractor that he sells. So let me write it over here as well. $2,000 per month. He also gets a bonus of $80 per tractor that he sells. This month he's saving for a trip to Hawaii. He needs, so this is important, he needs $5,500. He needs $5,500. At least how, and it wants to know at least, the real question is at least how many tractors must he sell to pay his bills. Now, whenever we see this word at least, or this phrase at least, we're really dealing with this. Something that can be greater than or equal to it. So we're also told to write an inequality. So let me get that ready. Something has to be greater than or equal to something else. Now, often with equation and inequality word problems, I like to think of what's the grand total? What amount is trying to be achieved? And in this case, he needs 5,500. So I'm going to write 5,500 there. Now, I'm also seeing here it says don't forget to define a variable. So when we define a variable, we always start it out with let. And then we look back at the question. It says here at least how many tractors. So you know what? The question is asking for the number of tractors. So I'm going to let T equal the number of tractors he must sell. Okay, so now that we've got that piece, we've got to think, well, how's he going to achieve this amount that he needs, the 5,500? Well, we see from the information that we collected over here, he earns $2,000 per month. And remember, we're talking about this month he's saving. And how many tractors must he sell this month? So he's only getting this $2,000 once for his monthly wage, but he's also getting $80 for each and every tractor. So if he sells 0 tractors, 80 times 0 is going to be nothing. He's not even going to get $80 bonus. If he sells 1 tractor, he's going to get 80 times 1, $80. If he sells 10 tractors, he's going to get 80 times 10, $800 bonus. So this is the inequality to represent this situation. 2,000 plus 80t is greater than or equal to 5,500. We don't need to solve it yet, but that's in the next question. Alright, so the inequality that we had was 2,000 plus 80t must be greater than or equal to 5,500. So in order to solve this, we could make sure that we do the same to both sides. So I'm going to put a dotted line. This is a 2-step inequality. We only have one t, and we have 2 things happening to it. It's being multiplied by 80 and then added to 2,000. So I'm going to undo this by subtracting the 2,000. Do the same to the other side. So now that's going to give me over here 3,500. We didn't divide or multiply by negative, so I'm going to keep the same inequality. These cancel. I'm left with 80t. So now what's happening to the t? It's being multiplied by 80. So I'm going to undo that. Divide by 80. Divide by 80. And we end up with t must be greater than or equal to 3,500 divided by 80. Well, straight away I can cancel a 0. So I've got 350 all over 8. So I'm going to do a little bit of work right now to get this to a better number. So 350 divided by 8, well, I can do my division by putting the first number I said inside the house. 8's into 3, 0. 8s into 35 go 4 times. 4 times 8 gives me 32. If we subtract that, we bring down 3 and then get a 0. 8 into 30 goes, that goes 3 times. 3 times 8 gives me 24. Subtract it, and that gives me a 6. Now, one thing that we could do is we could put our decimal and we could keep going, bringing down zeros. We could definitely do that. One nice thing that we can do as well is, as we know this is a remainder 6, we could put the remainder of 6 as a numerator back over the original number that we're dividing by, the 8. So I'm getting 43 and 6 over 8. And if we see that 6 over 8 is really 3/4, if we simplify it, divide by 2, the answer is 43 and 3 over 4. Now, we're told don't forget to show or work, which I'm pretty sure we did, but then it says show your answer as a sentence with units. So we really need to get into the habit of writing a nice sentence here. Now, we were asked how many tractors does he need to sell, so we can write he must sell. Now, 43 and 3/4, he can't sell 3/4 of a tractor. And if he sells only 43 tractors, he's not going to have enough money. He needs to sell more than 43. And so we've got to round this number up. So he must sell 44, put the units, tractors, to save enough money for his trip or his vacation, wherever he's going. But we cannot put 43 and 3/4, and we cannot put 43.75. And a lot of students will do this. And also, not only will they not round it up, which it has to be rounded up, even if it was 43.1, he can't sell 0.1 of a tractor. And although we usually round less than 5 down, in this case, when we're trying to find out how many he must sell to accomplish something, selling only 43 isn't going to be enough. And also, you must remember that there's units as well. So here it would be tractors. So that was number 4B. Okay, so thanks for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. Maybe leave a comment. If you want more practice and you didn't take the first equations and inequalities review quiz, you could go back and take that by visiting the same link as this at the start, except it won't have the number 2 at the end. It will just be /EQIN.